Everyone is going to have to work harder. So everyone going into these talks knows that there's going to have to be a process whereby the INDCs are the subject of ongoing review, and they need to be sharpened. There's no country that's really on track. Some are doing better than others, but we've just actually released a report looking at this and saying, well, if you look at the recent emissions intensity reductions by economy, how many of those would get you to where we need to get to? Answer, none. They will have to be more or less more aggressive. And so country by country we've gone through and identified that. We know that everyone is going to have to reduce their emissions intensity at rates that they have never done before.
Is that possible? It seems a monumental task.
Well, as I say, we're now sitting on technical possibilities that were not there, or they weren't economically viable, shall we say, a few years ago. So I think the answer is yes. It's going to be a huge stretch, and it will take much more than's been put on the table to date, but I think there are reasons to be optimistic if countries are prepared to treat their INDCs as a minimum which has to be added to, and not leaving it too long either.
So New Zealand only emits a very, very small proportion, as you well know, of global greenhouse gas emissions. So what benefit is there to New Zealand to work harder to reduce emissions, given our quite unusual profile?
Well, it's a global problem. It's a per capita problem, if you like. And it's not one where you can say, oh, we're just small, so we don't count. Well, every country, bar a handful, could run that argument. And so everyone sits around waiting for someone else to do something. So that doesn't wash. Secondly, New Zealand is a wealthy country. It is, one of the richest countries in the world. Not the richest, but it's in the OECD. There are 34 countries, most of which are developed, not all, but most of which are developed. So if countries like New Zealand said, oh, well, it's small, we don't have to do anything, how would we ever convince developing countries to take this issue seriously? Now, of course, it's in the developing world that the real emissions growth is poised to happen, and we have to head off that trajectory. It would not be credible for a country like New Zealand to say, well, we'll leave that to someone else. So it's a matter of good faith that we say we've got the resources, the human resources, the scientific and technical resources. We've got the institutional resources, got governments that can do things. New Zealand can certainly play its part. And in some areas, like agriculture, we have serious technical skill which we can share with others. So, every country has got a strong point and a weak point. They've got a bit which is difficult, they've got a bit which is easier, but everybody can do something.
So just one final question, because I know you've got to go. So do you feel pessimistic or optimistic about the future, given what you know?
I find myself suspended between pessimism and exhilaration. If you look at the trajectory that we're on, if you look at how long it's taken to get to where we've got to, we're looking at policy prescriptions that were talked about 20 years ago, which still haven't been put in place in some cases. You'd have to say this is a pretty pessimistic outlook, that we're looking at very significant climate change and all the mayhem that goes with it. On the other hand, in the last 5 or 10 years, there have been some technical revolutions. I think we can now say that we can completely decarbonise the electricity sector, and we're going to need a lot more electricity because it's such a convenient, clean source of energy. If we're going to move transport to electricity, we'll need even more electricity. But we can say now that we've got the technologies to actually produce a large amount of electricity renewably. We could not say that 10 years ago. So in terms of what's happening, particularly in electricity generation, in grids, in smart grids, in storage, there is a revolution going on, and it's shaking the business model of old power producers to the core. This very, very exciting possibility. So as I say, I think that's rather exhilarating because we really can see the end of the carbon economy coming there. There's difficult sectors, cement, steel. You know, it's not all easy, but if we could knock the electricity generation one for 6 and get that right, that's a huge step forward. So, you know, bittersweet.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Very good.
Cool.
Thank you very much.